Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining episode 2 of the JCR pod. For those of you that provided feedback from the first episode a couple of months ago, really appreciate all of the feedback and anyone who sent in any questions. I'm here today with Kevin in the midst of a UK heat wave, so I really appreciate his time today. We'll be sort of doing a bit of a deep dive really into life as a CASS leader, any challenges over the next 12 months, and looking specifically at the payment space. Obviously, CASS 15 safeguarding is a very hot topic, and a lot of you want to hear more on that. Thanks for joining us today, Kevin.
It's a pleasure. Good to be here.
For those of you,
you pulled me away from the beach.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, there's no beaches in Manchester, so I haven't taken myself away from a beach. I appreciate your time. For those of you that worked in CASS for any number of years, you'll have probably either worked with Kevin or at least seen some of the content that Kevin produces, or attended some of the conferences or webinars that Kevin's been involved in. So I really appreciate your time today. If we jump straight into CASS 15, as I said, very much a hot topic in the payments world, and further afield. Actually, a lot of people, I think, are interested in moving into this space. What are your initial thoughts with regards to the new rules coming in, and any challenges you think that leaders will face over the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I know that Zach talked about this in the first podcast. So I'm not going to go over all the background and the concerns that the FCA have in this particular space. I've actually been involved in, over recent years, working predominantly in the FX broking space, where typically firms have both a MiFID license and also undertake non-MiFID FX trades, and are generally subject to either the money regulations or the payment services regulations. So I've been in this position where within the same firm, I've been responsible for both CASS and safeguarding. But the thing is, that situation is quite unusual and may in fact be limited to firms working in the FX space. Generally, firms that are subject to safeguarding aren't subject to CASS and have had no previous experience with CASS. Now, the concept of safeguarding and the requirements around safeguarding haven't really changed for some time. There's been not only, of course, the regulations themselves, but there's been a fairly comprehensive approach document in place from the FCA for a few years now, and that has been revised from time to time. And looking at the proposed regulations within CASS 15, which effectively is the FCA consolidating client asset protection regulation, the proposed rules don't differ greatly, in my view, from what's been in the approach document for some time. And certainly anybody that has experience of working in the investment space and the CASS rules, then there's nothing really within proposed CASS 15 rules that should cause any concern. But for me, the significant change is and what might be long overdue is the tightening of the audit requirements. I mean, I always felt it, coming from an audit background and being a qualified auditor, it always seemed strange to me that somebody that wasn't a qualified auditor could do a safeguarding audit. So, at last that particular loophole has been closed, and in my experience, it's a loophole that many firms, including firms that I've worked with, have exploited. Why pay the huge amounts that are charged for CASS audits
Mm.
for a safeguarding audit when you don't have to? Um, and of course that's going to change. That will have a massive impact, I believe, um, on firms that are going to be subjected to the new rules and have no previous experience of CAS.
Mm.
Even those that have had previous experience of CAS, of course, it's going to cause quite a significant increase in their overall audit fees.
Mm.
Um, and I think alongside that is the issue of under what standards are auditors going to work to in performing safeguarding audits. Now, I imagine that in time the FRC will expand their current assurance standards, which have been in place for CAS for a few years, to cover safeguarding. But I don't know what the timeframes are going to be around that. I've had experience of a Big Four audit firm performing a safeguarding audit, and the big audit firms, I guess, feel that they have to hang their hat on some form of standard, and in my experience have gone for one of the established controls assurance standards, which are pretty onerous. So alongside firms having to cope with, for the first time, with a very rigorous, intrusive audit, you've got auditors that may be struggling to know what they need to do to perform the safeguarding audit.
Mm.
So I think overall that's going to be a very significant challenge.
Mm.
Um, of course, there'll be there are many firms that have entered the payments and e-money space in recent years that have had no prior experience of, let alone client asset regulation, but regulation at all. So, the extent to which they understood the requirements of the approach document, may may have been in question. That's being codified, as we know, in the new CAS 15. So yeah, significant challenges, I think,
Mm.
overall for that sector.
Do you think that one of the challenges that firms will be facing at the moment will be I guess, probably being in limbo a little bit at the moment? Because I know you mentioned MiFID. I was in recruitment whilst MiFID two was being implemented, and I think there was definitely a number of firms who were in that limbo for a little bit. I think. Do you think that if you were a CAS leader in the payment space at the moment, do you feel like you're in limbo, and what do you do about that? Do you just kind of sit tight and wait, or are you already starting to sort of implement changes now? But then I guess the challenge with that is, are you going to get the buy-in and the tools needed to actually implement those changes whilst they're in that sort of limbo?
Yeah, I've worked with clients over many years during which there have been significant changes to the CAS rules, and I've always advised my clients to assume that the rules that are drafted in the consultation paper are going to be the final rules.
Mm.
That's it's been my experience that there may have been tweaks here and there as a result of the consultation process, but generally, once the FCA have determined their path, that's the path that's taken.
Mm.
So I always advise firms not to wait until the consultation has finished or the rules are made final, this is the direction of travel, let's crack on with it. Because, some of these changes require, have fairly significant business implications.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. I think, I think where the challenge may arise is, you're right. It's always best to get ahead of the curve and be proactive on this sort of stuff. But if a business is, suddenly CASS is all new to them, and they get an idea of the costs that come along with building out a CASS team and building out a CASS framework, will some firms be minded to actually sort of see how the land lies later on before spending the money in case there are any changes, or do you think most firms will be front-footed about it?
well, there's always a reluctance to spend money in businesses.
Yeah.
And I guess particularly at the moment, there are a number of cost pressures on businesses with, increased employer national insurance and so on. So I imagine many businesses will be reluctant to splash the cash. But, they're going to have to at some stage. And, I would always advocate, as I've said, let's get cracking.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, fair enough. And just looking at CAS as a whole, so outside of payments, just across the industry, um, there is obviously the changes with regards to SMCR in the last 2 or 3 years, and um, seems like teams and structures have changed. One of the things that a lot of people I've spoken to have kind of really been intrigued about is that relationship with the rest of the business. So how CAS works with operations, compliance, audit, sales, with senior managers, and I think certain frustrations with, how I guess where CAS sits in the team, in the business, and how they work with other areas. What is your experience with that, Kevin? And where do you think CAS is best fitting into a business to work well with other business units?
sure. Yeah. I've worked with a lot of firms and, a lot of different approaches um, to establishing a CAS oversight function. Um, I've always been a strong advocate of embedding CAS compliance across the business in the areas that impact CAS compliance. Um, so, for instance, in operational functions like cash in payments and so on, making sure that the people that are working in those areas understand what the CAS requirements are, but fundamentally why those requirements exist.
Mhm.
How what they do relates to protecting client assets or client money. So I've always been a strong advocate of that. Where I have seen the most significant CAS issues during the long time I've been involved in CAS, I guess, sort of lie in two areas. First of all is business change, new products, new systems.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important that those who are tasked with responsibility for CAS, as well as other areas of compliance, are heavily involved and consulted during those processes, introducing new products. What are the implications in terms of operational processes? What does that mean in terms of CAS compliance? Systems changes. Are we really doing enough testing? Are we using appropriate data when we perform that testing?
Mhm.
So I think anything around the change agenda the CASS oversight function has to be heavily involved with and be part of that sign-off process.
Mm.
From my personal experience, I've been a CASS oversight officer where a new product that had different CASS implications was introduced, and I knew nothing about it. That's one area. The second area is around reconciliations.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that's ever been to one of my training courses will know how passionate I regard reconciliations, in particular reconciliation breaks or exceptions. How are we managing those? What do they mean? Often those mean a potential CASS breach. Because the CASS rules require accurate records. If there's a proliferation of reconciliation breaks, it might suggest that the internal records aren't accurate. Having proper root cause analysis and using reconciliations as a means of driving continuous improvement in internal processes and controls is something that I've been passionate about.
On the topic of reconciliations, Kevin, do you think that the introduction of automation and technology is something that a lot of CAS leaders have benefited from, and those that are still doing a lot of things manually, is it time that they really look into what they can automate?
Yes, but it can be a double-edged sword. I've been involved in some very significant projects that have been a result of implementing automated reconciliation software, but not implementing it properly. So, again, it falls into that business change agenda. Everything has to be meticulously planned and tested before going live. But yeah, clearly, particularly if you're in a high transaction volume environment, you need to have some form of automated reconciliation system.
Okay. And then just moving over to the CAS rules as a whole. One of the things that I recently polled on LinkedIn was, do the CAS rules need any reform? In recent years, the financial services landscape has changed dramatically with the introduction of crypto and the sort of fintech space is a lot busier than it was, and there's new products and do you think that the CAS rules are still 100% fit for purpose, or do there need to be some reform to kind of keep up with a continually advancing financial services space?
So your poll was with CAS professionals.
Yeah, well, I put it out to my network,
Yeah.
and it was asking CAS leaders and CAS professionals whether they believe that some reforms are due with regards to the CAS source book as a whole, and I think it was something like 96% said at least some reform is needed, and actually about half of those said that a complete overhaul is due. So yeah, my gut tells me that some reform is needed, but I'd be keen to get your thoughts on that.
I'm thinking, who are the 4% that were happy with the CAS rules as they're currently written? Look, the CAS, and again, this will come as no surprise that anybody that's attended one of my training sessions, the CAS rules aren't written in a very helpful way. They're not written in a way that you can look at them and pretty clearly know what you need to do from an operational point of view. So from that point of view, all of us that work in the area of CAS would benefit from a more helpful set of rules. But I think you've got to look at this pragmatically. Yes, there will be changes, no doubt, in terms of crypto and and digital assets. And I'm sure the FCA, that's a major area of that's under review by the FCA currently. But in terms of what we've currently got, I mean, many of the client money rules that exist now have been in place for, well, longer than I've been involved in CASS, so more than 30 years. Um, and I think what us that work in CASS have to recognise is that, alongside change comes cost.
Yep.
If you ran the same poll amongst business leaders and finance professionals, I'm sure it would be it would be 97, 96% that wouldn't want change, because they
Yeah.
know that change brings additional costs. So I think we have to be pragmatic about that, and I don't and again, it's cost for the regulator.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't think there'd be a great appetite for them to overhaul the CAS rules as they stand.
Mm.
What I guess I'm a bit disappointed about is that there hasn't been more work done around establishing best practice in various industry sectors that are subject to the CAS rules. I mean, I guess a big issue with the CAS rules is it's one set of rules
Yeah.
for all firms, and firms that are subject to CAS come in very different shapes and sizes, work in very different types of environments, and this one set of rules doesn't lend itself very well to that. But what I'm disappointed in is that some sectors haven't sort of got their heads together and say, look, let's develop these are particular issues for us in our sector when it comes to complying with CAS.
Mm.
Let's develop some good practice. Now, I know I'm very aware of the great work that the TISA CAS forum and committee has done in that space. I actually helped set up that those working parties, 13 years ago or whatever, and it's been really encouraging to see how that particular forum has flourished. But
Mm.
that covers I'm going to say a relatively small number of firms that are subject to CAS. I don't know the figures, but clearly, the own members of the TISA CAS working party are members of TISA, so it's only firms that manage tax incentivized savings and investments.
Mhm.
Um, so, but what I'm really disappointed about is that where there has been efforts to develop codes of good practice, that's not been supported necessarily by the audit fraternity, um, and and by the FCA themselves. So I, I think there are very significant cash challenges in particular sectors that are still not being properly addressed, where there's still some very differing interpretation of the rules, and that's not being helped um, by auditors or the FCA themselves.
Do you think that, I guess, one way that CAS leaders can do all they can really to sort of stay on top of the rules and any changes and best practice is actually by getting involved in events and peer-to-peer discussion and sharing knowledge? I don't think personally, I don't think enough of that happens. Obviously there are quarterly or annual events, but things change so quickly. do you think that there is definitely a sort of more of that needs to happen, more content needs to be released, and more knowledge sharing and best practice?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think more of that needs to be hosted by the FCA themselves.
Yeah.
Back 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, when the FCA were in the process of making significant changes to the CASS rules following the financial crisis, then they would often host big events, which were really helpful and created that forum for discussion and feedback. But that doesn't happen now. In fact, there are conferences that do take place where the FCA don't attend, and which is disappointing.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. All right, Kevin. Well, I appreciate your time. I think we've covered some really good topics there. Yeah, really appreciate your insight and your expertise, and I'm sure many of the people who are listening, hopefully either learned some new stuff or giving them some sort of things to think about and consider. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. The plan is to continue to release a new episode every 4 to 6 weeks. But in the next episode, Kevin, anything in particular that you'd like me to kind of focus on, whether it's CASS or elsewhere in the financial services world?
No, I'll let you be driven by what the viewers want.
Okay,
I'm reaching the end of my of the road in terms of my career in CAS, and hopefully I've been able to share something that's of interest or use to those that are either starting out on their journey or sort of part way through. But yeah, I'll let you be driven by what people
great.
are asking you for.
Well, if anyone has any ideas that they want us to focus on next time, drop us a comment or drop me a DM over LinkedIn. And but appreciate your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of the good weather, and have a great weekend.
Yes, and you. Thank you, James.
Cheers, Kevin. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.